Sometimes, before unfolding a subject of unusual nature, it helps to pause for a quiet moment, as one would when opening an old volume in a still library. With that calm shift of attention, the narrative begins. Among the first manifestations of Tyranid living artillery stands the Biovore spore cannon, a creature whose form and function merge so seamlessly that its presence on the battlefield feels less like a weapon deployed and more like a biological response to the existence of opposition. Its massive dorsal organ swells slowly before release, building a dense chemical pressure, as though the living mass inside understands the exact moment the air beyond will be most vulnerable. When it fires, it does not resemble the recoil of a mechanical launcher. Instead, the creature's frame expands and contracts like a pulse, sending forth a globular spore packed with corrosive compounds that drift for a heartbeat with deceptive calm before rupturing into a cloud capable of clinging to armor, dissolving it layer by layer. The impact is less an explosion and more an infection, an immediate reshaping of the environment as surfaces bubble, structures sag, and the ground itself becomes hostile. Soldiers caught within the spreading vapor experience a sudden collapse of the world around them, as though the very air has decided to turn against them. The psychological effect of witnessing such a transformation is often as potent as the physical one. Fortifications that once symbolized stability begin to sag and peel, while barriers meant to block advance erode into ragged, skeletal outlines. As armies struggled to identify a pattern to these attacks, it became clear that the creature does not merely provide ranged fire, but actively shifts the terrain into a medium of Tyranid advantage, softening the battlefield into something malleable, something ready for what follows. Because from the residue of those dissolved surfaces and the drifting acid clouds emerges a new coherence in the swarm's design, a prelude that naturally leads into the next organism engineered for ranged dominance, shaped not around corrosion, but around the dispersal of concentrated venom. From the lingering haze left by the Biovore's corrosive discharge emerges a different kind of presence, one that does not deform the battlefield through dissolution, but saturates it with invisible pressure. The Venom cannon is less a creature and more a living reservoir of toxins, whose composition shifts with each pulse of its internal sacs, as though the organism continually recalibrates the ideal blend for whatever prey lies ahead. When it releases its payload, the act resembles a convulsion guided by instinct, a sudden tightening of sinew around fluid-filled chambers that propels a dense stream of particulate venom forward with remarkable force. Unlike the spreading corrosion of spore clouds, this weapon imposes its influence through direct contact, striking armor with a wet, percussive impact that embeds the toxic slurry into fractures, joints, and microscopic imperfections. The true devastation unfolds a heartbeat later as the venom infiltrates structural materials and organic tissue alike, breaking coherence from within rather than tearing it apart from without. Victims often falter not because of visible trauma, but due to the abrupt failure of internal systems, a collapse so swift that the battlefield absorbs the event without spectacle. And while soldiers struggle to comprehend what struck them, commanders quickly learn that the Venom cannon does not aim to destroy fortifications outright. It undermines the living force behind them, reducing squads into pockets of silent, unmoving shapes whose armor remains largely intact, even as the bodies within succumb to liquefying neurotoxins. What distinguishes this weapon is the way its presence alters the rhythm of engagement. Units advance cautiously, unrest grows among ranks, and the ground ahead feels charged with unseen threat. Yet even this Venom touch is only one gradient of Tyranid artillery, a step in a hierarchy of biological forms that refine destruction with increasing precision. As the venom dries into a brittle crust and the air becomes heavy with chemical residue, another organism moves into position, its structure built not for dissolving or poisoning, but for casting projectiles with an instinctive accuracy that reshapes mid-range combat, heralding the emergence of a weapon whose function lies in delivering death across distance with the precision of a predatory reflex. As the venom-soaked remnants of battle settle into the earth, the swarm shifts its pattern again, revealing a form that binds motion, instinct, and projection into a single coherent act. The deathspitter is built around the principle of relentless mid-range pressure, its internal chambers constantly churning with a mixture of semi-liquid bioacid and hardened parasitic shards suspended within it. When the creature contracts, it expels these volatile masses with a sharp biological snap, each shot traveling in a tight arc that seems guided less by trajectory and more by an innate understanding of where a moving target will be a moment later. The effect is immediate and deeply unsettling. Armor struck by the projectile's fractures as if something inside it is pushing outward, while exposed flesh reacts with spasms triggered by both chemical burn and invasive organisms attempting to root themselves before the host falls. This weapon does not saturate terrain or shroud formations. Instead, it punctuates the battlefield with rapid, decisive bursts that deny the enemy the comfort of steady lines or predictable cover. Its rhythm creates a stuttering instability across engagements, forcing squads to move erratically, never certain which angle will be compromised next. And as those shards continue to hiss within broken plating and ruptured surfaces, the swarm does not pause. Another silhouette takes the foreground, its purpose sharper, its strikes narrower, channeled into the precise violence of accelerated bone. From the stuttering cadence of the deathspitter's corrosive bursts, the swarm extends a different limb of its living arsenal, one shaped for velocity rather than saturation. The gargoyle spine launcher resembles a cluster of taut organic slings wound into the creature's frame, each chamber storing elongated spines grown from hardened chitin, their surfaces lined with minute barbs that catch the light before release. When fired, there is no pronounced recoil, only a rapid, synchronized flex of muscular strands sending volleys of spines forward with a speed that mimics the snap of predatory wings. These projectiles do not dissolve or infect. They simply penetrate with unerring directness, embedding themselves in armor plates or exposed joints with such force that even glancing impacts disrupt movement and formation. Troops struck by the clusters often react too late, discovering that a single spine has jammed a weapon mechanism or compromised a respirator seal, transforming minor wounds into cascading vulnerabilities. The weapon alters the atmosphere of battle by thinning the distance between attack and impact, instilling a sense that the air itself has become a carrier of sudden, needle-fine violence. And just as those spines continue to quiver in breached surfaces, the swarm shifts once more, preparing a heavier, deeper note in its arsenal, one rooted not in precision splinters, but in the slow, devastating pulse of organic artillery built to anchor the advance. As the last vibrations of embedded spines fade into the churned ground, a heavier shape asserts its presence, not with speed or subtlety, but with the slow, resonant confidence of a creature bred to anchor the swarm's advance. The Tyrant cannon grows from the massive frame of its bearer, like an extension of will, its broad, organic chambers swelling and contracting with a deep, rhythmic force that resembles the breathing of some colossal organism beneath the earth. When it fires, the discharge is a compressed mass of biological matter driven forward by internal pressures that build not explosively, but deliberately, as though each shot is sculpted in the moment before release. The impact produces a concussive bloom that distorts ground cover, overturns barricades, and sends shock waves rolling through any defensive line that dares hold its position. Unlike lighter bioweapons, this one does not target individuals. It reshapes terrain, breaks formations, and opens corridors through which the swarm can flow unimpeded. Even its missed shots impose strategic consequences, carving furrows into the soil or rupturing structural supports, leaving defenders with fewer places to stand. And as the echoes of those organic detonations drift outward, the battlefield settles into a brief, uneasy quiet, the kind that signals not relief, but transition, for the Tyranids rarely leave such openings unfilled, and another form of living artillery always rises to continue the sequence. From the tremors left by the Tyrant cannon's concussive strikes, a subtler rhythm emerges, one shaped not around brute force, but around the arc of possibility itself. The living mortar rises from within the swarm like a biological engine devoted to trajectory, its upper carapace splitting open to reveal a pulsating sac that adjusts its tension with uncanny precision. Each round it releases is a living organism in miniature, a soft-bodied projectile that stiffens mid-flight and alters its curve as though sensing shifts in wind, heat, or movement below. Unlike static artillery, the mortar's purpose is to reach what hides rather than what stands in plain sight. Trenches where soldiers cling to fleeting safety, blind corners of ruined structures, depressions in the terrain that were once considered beyond the reach of conventional fire. When the projectile descends, it does so with a muted thud, expanding rapidly before rupturing into clusters of acidic or parasitic matter tailored by the organism's internal chemistry. The effect is a quiet subversion of defensive logic, a reminder that cover offers no guarantee when faced with a weapon that interprets the battlefield as a dynamic map rather than a fixed set of angles. And as those living rounds continue to hiss within collapsed shelters and fractured stone, the swarm shifts once more, preparing to unleash a form of destruction that abandons arcs and calculations altogether in favor of direct, sweeping contact with corrosive breath. From the lingering hiss of the living mortar's ruptured spores emerges a different expression of Tyranid firepower, one that abandons distance and trajectory in favor of immediate, overwhelming transformation. The acid spray organ functions not as a cannon or launcher, but as a breathing aperture of controlled dissolution, its inner membranes constantly cycling corrosive fluids that shift in density and volatility with each muscular contraction. When the creature expels its payload, the effect resembles a directed exhalation, wide, heavy, and impossibly fast, casting a sheet of liquid corrosion that clings to surfaces with predatory intent. Armor does not merely melt. It folds inward as if rejecting its own structure, while stone and metal warp into softened, collapsing shapes. The spray alters entire sections of terrain in moments, creating zones where footing dissolves, where walls lose their integrity, where even air carries the sharp, metallic sting of active corrosion. Defenders caught in its path rarely fall from burns alone. Instead, they are overwhelmed by the sudden failure of everything around them, as barricades twist into useless silhouettes and machinery crumples before their eyes. Unlike long-range weapons, this organ thrives in the chaos of proximity, turning any attempt to hold a choke point into a brief, doomed stand. And as the fumes rise from those reshaped surfaces, the swarm's configuration changes again, aligning itself around yet another organism whose purpose lies in multiplication and saturation, unleashing volleys not of liquid or spore, but of hardened spines, grown for collective impact. Out of the warped terrain left shimmering beneath the acid spray organs, corrosive breath, another biological mechanism asserts itself, one designed not for sweeping dissolution, but for overwhelming volume delivered with mechanical inevitability. The spine cluster launcher grows from the creature's flank like a dense lattice of organic tubes, each chamber nurturing a bundle of hardened chitinous spines that mature in tightly packed arrays. When the organism contracts its internal musculature, these clusters are expelled in rapid succession, breaking apart mid-flight into a storm of needle-thin projectiles that blanket a wide swath of ground. This barrage does not rely on precision. Its strength lies in saturation, in transforming open spaces into fields of sudden, synchronized impact, where movement becomes a gamble and stillness an invitation to be pierced from multiple angles at once. Armor struck by the clusters resonates with dozens of tiny impacts, each spine embedding itself just deeply enough to compromise joints, weaken plating, or create points of vulnerability for the swarm to exploit. Infantry caught within the pattern often falter before understanding what hit them, discovering that their footing, equipment, and orientation have been disrupted by wounds too numerous and too shallow to treat individually. The psychological weight of such fire is immense. An entire front can collapse simply from the sense that the air has become weaponized, unpredictable, and omnidirectional. And as the echoes of those needle storms fade, the swarm's silhouette shifts again, drawing forward an organism whose purpose eclipses mere suppression or harassment, concentrating its biological might into a singular, fortress-breaking pulse that signals the arrival of a far heavier form of living artillery. From the thinning storm of shattered spines, the battlefield seems to inhale before releasing a deeper, slower resonance, one that announces the approach of a creature whose purpose extends beyond disruption or suppression. The Hive cannon rises like a living siege engine, its vast organic chambers swelling with the weight of embryonic munitions grown specifically for the destruction of hardened structures. Each round is a dense, pulsating mass layered with reactive tissues that tighten in anticipation of release, as though the projectile itself senses the tension of the moment. When fired, the recoil ripples through the creature's frame in a measured, wave-like motion, sending the warhead arcing with a gravity-defying steadiness toward fortifications assumed to be safe behind distance and reinforced plating. Upon impact, the projectile expands with violent intent, its inner membranes rupturing outward to deliver both concussive force and invasive biological matter that pries apart metal, stone, and composite materials from within. Walls collapse not in dramatic explosions, but in slow, dreadful folds, as if their structural cohesion has been quietly unmade. Defensive emplacements that once anchored entire lines dissolve into jagged silhouettes, leaving no stable geometry for retreat or resistance. What makes the Hive cannon especially feared is not only its destructive power, but the way its presence reshapes the psychology of defense. Soldiers begin to doubt their shelters. Commanders hesitate to cluster forces, and every piece of cover becomes merely a temporary suggestion. And as the ruins settle into uneven heaps of softened rubble, the swarm directs its final specialized organism into position, one that does not shatter structures or mutilate armor, but instead reaches directly into the minds of those still standing, unraveling resolve where physical weapons have already thinned the ranks. As the rubble settles into uneven mounds, shaped by the Hive cannon's slow undoing of stone and steel, the final contour of Tyranid living artillery steps forward, carrying no weight of explosive mass or corrosive breath. The neurotoxin projector is a quieter organism, its structure built around chambers of translucent membranes that shimmer faintly as chemical impulses ripple beneath their surface. When it exhales its payload, there is no flash or violent noise, only a diffused pulse of particulate mist that drifts with deceptive softness, spreading through broken corridors, collapsing trenches, and the narrow pockets where defenders gather in the last attempt to anchor themselves to the remnants of formation. The toxin it releases does not tear flesh or dissolve armor. Instead, it threads itself into the nervous system, softening perception, dulling judgment, loosening the coherence that turns individuals into a unit. Soldiers struck by it feel the battlefield slipping from their grasp, as if the world has become slightly unmoored, voices distant, movements delayed, thoughts fractured into disjointed fragments. In this haze, resistance loses its shape long before bodies fall, not through pain, but through the quiet unraveling of will. Structures already wounded by living artillery stand in dim silhouette, and the air hangs heavy with the residue of spores, acid, and shattered chitin. The swarm does not rush the final steps. It simply advances into the softened space, filling the gaps left by weapons that reshaped matter and mind alike. And as the last traces of neurotoxin drift outward in fading spirals, the battlefield settles into a stillness that feels less like an ending and more like a natural consequence, a quiet rearrangement of what remains after living artillery has completed its work.